Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of BookTrib Live, a Merrill Moss Media production. Today we're thrilled to chat with Naomi Katz, author of the new book Beautiful, Being an Empowered Young Woman. In addition to being an author and the founder of Beautiful Project, an organization dedicated to empowering adolescent women across the globe, Katz is an educator who has been working with young women for over 15 years on 4 continents. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Naomi. Before we start with our questions, can you bring our viewers up to speed on Beautiful and the main ideas that the book tackles?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Beautiful is a book that is written for an adolescent audience, specifically adolescent girls, and each chapter deals with different issues that are the main issues that adolescent girls are facing. So the focus in the beginning is understanding adolescence. What does it mean to be a developing young woman? What's happening in my body? How does that affect my emotions? Mm-hmm. And then we start to talk about different things like objectification and the way that women are being portrayed in the media, mm-hmm. and learning to be honest with ourselves and with each other about how that affects us. Talking about healthy relationships and how can I cultivate healthy friendships with other girls, with boys, with the people around me at school and in other organizations. How can I cultivate healthy relationships in my family, with my parents, with my siblings? We also talk about peer pressure and meanness and competition. We talk about sex and sexuality. Mm-hmm. We talk about drugs and alcohol. We talk about stress. And in each chapter, I try to give the girls a real, honest conversational voice, both my own and the voices of my students, and then offer them suggestions. How can we really cope with these different things that we're facing?
Mm-hmm. That all sounds like stuff I really wish that I knew about when I was going through my teenage years, because it was rough. But first, let me ask, before all of this came to be, what really inspired you to work with young women?
Well, in actuality, I can't say if I inspired them or they inspired me, because they asked me to do it. I was teaching at a private school on the Upper West Side of New York City, and the school had a mini-term course, or just a mini-term, which meant that all regular classes were canceled during the 6 weeks in the most darkest dead of winter, and teachers taught whatever they wanted, which is awesome. A great refresh for that time of year. Yeah, it was fantastic. And I was a really young teacher, probably 23 at that time, and I think I looked more like the students than I did like the teachers, and so all of the girls in middle school hung around my desk and talked to me about a lot of different things. And at some point, one of them asked me, one of them who I'm still in contact with today, and she's almost 30 years old, she asked me if we could have an all-girls mini-term class. And I thought it was a great idea. I had no idea what we would talk about. I was a brand new teacher, but I liked the idea, and I spoke to the principal, and he agreed. And we did it. And the mini-term class was amazing. And then they didn't want to stop after mini-term was over, so we continued to meet during lunch for the rest of the school year, really, once or twice a week. And I can really remember the first day that I came into the mini-term class, and they're all sitting around this table, 15 girls, and they're just with their eyes super wide. And I start to get really nervous, and I know them all. They're all my students in my history class. And all of a sudden I'm really nervous because I think that they think that I have the answers. But I only had questions, and I myself was 23. But it was great. We went on a journey together, and it was really incredible. And the impact of that class, it was outstanding on them and also on me. And I understood that I have something special to give to these girls, and they have a special need to really be able to come together and talk to one another and be heard by one another in an environment that's not competitive, that's not judgmental, that's quite different from their day-to-day friendship circle. Even among close friends in those years, there's often a lot of feelings of competition. And I was able to maintain that space for them. And so the things that came out of that class were incredible. Girls who were in the dynamic of one of them being the bully and one of them being the victim right outside the door of that class could sit in that room and discuss with each other how they really felt about one another and about school and about popularity. Wow. And that was really amazing.
Oh, it sounds amazing. And I can't imagine having to teach a class about what it means to be a woman to a bunch of younger girls. I'm 22. I can't imagine doing it at 23. It's just daunting to me. But something else I wanted to ask you about that's kind of jumping off that point is how much of Beautiful is based on your own experiences as a teen versus what you've learned and the questions that you've been asked that had to answer to your students? What's the dynamic there within the book itself?
I don't even know, to be totally honest, because it all kind of merged into one. Because I the work that I do with young people, and I think anyone who works with young people, and especially anybody who works like as a woman working with young women, the line between what comes from my experiences as an adolescent and what comes from my understanding as an educator, that line is very blurry, because my understanding as an educator is really deeply informed by my experiences as an adolescent. And so I, for example, was kind of the girl who was both being pushed around and also bullying other people. I was in the popular clique in my middle school. I'm talking about middle school because I went to a big public high school and started as a new student in 9th grade, and that was a disaster. So in middle school, yeah, I threw up on the first day, and my mom said I still had to go to school.
What?
So anyway, in middle school, I was in the popular clique, which is ridiculous that there even was one because there were 23 kids in our grade, but there was. And so, but I was not the most popular girl nor the leader of the popular clique. So I was kind of being pushed around by the other girls, but then taking that out on other girls. And so when I work with girls now, I understand what it's like to be the bully, and I understand what it's like to be bullied, and I understand what it's like to be self-conscious. I was also a bit overweight. I don't like to use the word fat, but I was a bit overweight in those years of my life, and so I was very self-conscious about that, but felt like I needed to project an image of self-confidence because if I were weak, then nobody would respect me. Mm-hmm. And so, when I write about those different aspects of adolescence in the book, I'm writing about myself in a very clear way, and I don't think that I really even try to hide it. But I also see reflections of myself, or reflections of who I wish I was, or reflections of who I admired in my students. Mm-hmm. So it's really a mix between the two. I don't know if I could say like it's half this and half this, but they're both very present.
Wow. That was such a great answer to that question. Throughout the book you have excerpts from your students. How many of them do you still keep in touch with? It seems like they had such a huge influence on creating this idea. Are you friends with all of them still?
I wish I were friends with all of them. Not all of them, but definitely some of them. Definitely, some of those girls were my students more than 15 years ago. Although I have to say that the ones from the original group at that school in New York, I'm in touch with most of them. But I think maybe half of them I'm still in contact with them in some way. Not necessarily regular contact, but then there are some who are still a very big part of my life and I of theirs. And I still coach them and work with them and talk to them on a regular basis. And it was, it was a really formative experience. And I think also for any educator, some of the students that you work with are people who will be part of your life forever. Yeah. And some of them, not necessarily, and that's okay too. But I definitely am still in contact with them. And the girl who's on the cover, the woman who's on the cover, she was my student 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago. And now she's probably 25 or 26 on the cover, and that was relatively recent, that photograph.
Wow, it's pretty awesome that you were able to get one of your students from way back when to be the book cover, and it's a very striking book cover, and anyone who hasn't seen it, I highly recommend you look it up. It's beautiful. But I want to hop into a couple of questions.
Sorry to interrupt, but not just one of my students. Actually, her father had the vision of the book, and that's why I asked her to be on the cover, because her father, she and her sister both were really fully adolescents a few years after I taught her. Kara is the girl on the cover. And her dad reached out to me and said that he felt like his daughters weren't listening to him, and he wanted to offer them advice and support them in their growth as young women. And he knew that no matter what he tried, they wouldn't actually listen to what he was saying, as most kids don't do with their parents when they're adolescents, especially not girls with their dads. So he had a publishing house, and he asked me to write a book. And that was how the idea was born. And so Kara's on the cover, both because she's incredible and I love her and I'm glad that she's on the cover, but also to honor the vision that her father had.
Wow, that's fantastic. It's really interesting the way those connections can create something beautiful, beautiful. But I want to jump into a couple of specific questions about the book, if you don't mind. In the intro to the book, you offer a scene of a man catcalling a woman on a city street. How, if at all, should a young woman respond to that situation? Because I think that's a real question that a lot of women don't really, it's an uncomfortable thing and we don't know how to deal with it. So what do you think?
Somebody just asked me that yesterday, and I wish that I had a better answer than this, yeah, because what I wish is that you could say, anyone could say to their catcaller, like really turn around and say, why are you talking to me this way? Do you want my attention? Because if you do, this isn't the way to get it. And to really have a conversation, yeah. But a lot of times what happens for teen girls is that their catcallers are older than they are.
Yeah.
And so responding can put them in a dangerous situation. And I don't want to encourage anyone to endanger herself. And so sometimes you can't respond. When you can, I would respond, and I do, and if you're with your parent or if you're with someone who's older and you feel like they can respond on your behalf to a catcaller who's older than you, then that's great. You should definitely, say something, and you can say something calmly, or if you get angry, you can say something angrily, though that probably won't have as much of an effect. But try, you can try to engage, but a lot of times those situations are not the kind of situations that really invite engagement. When you're walking down the street and someone like makes a kissing noise at you or something like that.
Yeah.
So my main advice to teen girls is to walk on with your head high. Don't let yourself be affected more than necessary by this kind of behavior. Unfortunately, it happens all the time. So try as much as you can to stay strong and carry on. And remember also that behavior really says nothing about you, because I've also interacted with students who aren't getting catcalled and who feel bad about it because they wish that they were, because they feel like their friends are getting called out. Well, what about me? Am I not attractive enough? And so the whole behavior of just talking to people, not just girls, but talking to people that way on the street is so inappropriate and reflective of so many other cultural questions that I think the best thing is to walk forward with strength and with pride in who you are and try to just put it out of your mind.
Yeah. Well, the idea of like someone being disappointed that they're not being catcalled at is really unique and interesting. But it also sort of brings to the forefront one of the main issues of the book, which is the language that people, and specifically women use to discuss each other and to talk about, who we are and how we identify. And I just thought I'd ask you straight up, for anybody who hasn't gotten the chance to read this book yet, how does language affect the way that we as women think about ourselves as women?
Language has immense power, and we best recognize that and admit that to ourselves in order to be able to carry forward in our lives. So, for example, if I create an environment around myself that's an environment of judgment and an environment of competition, then that's the environment in which I live. And that's not going to be the best environment for my own positive growth. So, for example, I start my day and I look in the mirror and I'm not totally satisfied with what I see. Oh, my hair is flat. Oh, I think I look fat in this outfit. If I say that to myself, then how am I starting my day? There's a really big difference between looking in the mirror and saying, oh my God, I'm so fat. Or, wow, I haven't been working out as much as I could lately. I've been in better shape before. I think I'm going to take a dance class today. Both of those are responses to the same feeling and to the same behavior of noticing something and then wanting to respond to it. But the responses are completely different. And the power in the language that I use to talk about myself cannot be underestimated. And then the way I talk about myself has a huge impact on the way I talk about other people. So if I talk about myself in a way that's empowering and I say, I'm going to start working out more, then when I meet you for coffee later that day, instead of saying to you, like, oh, do I look okay in this outfit? Or looking at you and thinking, Katie, she's looked better before. I could say, oh, Katie, let's go to yoga today. And it has a chain effect, and it's not, maybe I've lost sight of the question because it's not just about what we say, but it's also about how we say it. We live in a culture where women have a hard time accepting compliments, where we don't really think it's okay to feel good about ourselves and to speak positively about ourselves. What kind of environment are we creating for ourselves and for the next generation?
Yeah, I think the idea of always being constructive, even when it's something that's somewhat critical about yourself, is really one of the key points that the book illustrates, and I think it's a really powerful and positive message. Something that you also just brought up was the idea of competing, and, the way we talk about other girls is influenced by this as teenagers teenagers at least, by this idea of competing with other girls. And I thought I would ask you to just sort of expand on that idea, because you've mentioned it a couple times in our conversation, and I think it's a really, really big issue. It's one that I experienced a lot when I was a teenager, so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about strategies that young girls can really grapple with to diminish the idea of competition within their communities.
So I think it's first really useful to think about where the competition comes from. Why are we competing with each other? Why aren't we collaborating? How can we learn to work together in a way that informs a positive experience for myself and for my friend? So maybe we're competing because we're self-conscious often. Maybe we're competing because there actually is a lack of resources. Maybe we're competing for the attention of somebody else, and we know that that person can't pay equal attention to us both at the same time. You know, it happens all the time with siblings and their parents' attention, for example. Maybe we're competing because that's the culture in which we live, a very competitive culture that's all about achieving and getting to the next step and getting into the right high school or the right college. So first of all, really look at why am I competing and how does it affect me? That's number one. And number two, to then think about, okay, in my social circle, my friends are my allies. And when I was an adolescent, and I think that this is true of my students too, our friends are our greatest allies because we live in this place of thinking that our parents don't really understand us. And in some ways they don't, because they're from a different generation. And they're not in this phase of recognizing independence and stepping into our new self and growing into adults. And so we need our friends. How can we cultivate relationships with our friends that are relationships of trust and of sharing and of cooperation? So I would really suggest to girls to cultivate that and to choose. Not everyone needs to be your best friend. There are certain people who will be great allies to you and certain people who bring out behaviors that you might not like in yourself even. Maybe those aren't the people that you need to spend the most time with. That's one thing that I would do kind of in regard to competition. And the other thing is, well, two things we talked about. Looking at myself and understanding why I'm competitive. Looking at the situation around me and understanding who are really my allies. And lastly, to really understand how can I create an environment of collaboration with the people around me. How can I do things that will foster togetherness? And I wish it weren't this way, but a lot of times when we're in an environment that's all girls, then that's when sometimes the most competitive behavior comes out. But that's also the times when many girls feel like they can be most themselves and they're not trying to impress other people, particularly boys, and then they can feel comfortable. So also to look for ways to be in environments that are environments just for girls and to feel comfortable.
Wow.
Oh, and another element that I would think about is that a lot of times girls who have really strong leadership qualities aren't necessarily guided to develop and to cultivate those leadership qualities. And so what ends up happening is that they might get labeled as bossy or, you know, terms like that bring them down. And those girls who have those leadership qualities, that's amazing. And we, the adults, should recognize those qualities and cultivate them and understand that leadership is a positive attribute and not tell a girl who's a leader that she's bossy. Maybe she herself doesn't know how to direct the energy of leadership because she hasn't been taught that. And she's using it in a way of being competitive and maybe sometimes even manipulative. But if we cultivate positive leadership development among young people, girls in particular, then we can also, in that way, foster a greater environment of collaboration.
That's a really great answer. And yeah, I think that, competition is a huge issue between girls. And I think that, there's a lot of really big wig feminist type of women like to say, oh, we can't compete, we can't be putting each other down, we need to push each other up. But I feel like a lot more people say it than really do it. So I think that making sure that you have like an open and cooperative environment is extremely important, especially when you're trying to grow. But kind of moving on, I just read a great question from one of our viewers whose name is Callie. I'm going to put it on the screen. I think that this is something that you might have something interesting to say about. The question is, do you have any insight into friendships between women that develop into more? So thank you, Callie, for that question.
Thank you. I think that what Callie is meaning is a friendship between women that develops maybe into a romantic relationship. I don't know if there's a way to ask her if that's what she means.
I don't think so, but I think you're right.
You don't think that that's what she means?
I don't think we can ask her, but I think you're right. That's exactly what she means.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, Callie, I hope that that's what you mean, so I'm going to try and address that. Any insight into friendships between women that develop into more? I think that that's great. I think that if one is in a relationship with another woman who, like a friendship with another woman, and then that friendship deepens and then develops into a romantic relationship, then that's an amazing boost for your life. I would hope that all romantic relationships would develop in that way, where there's a basis of real trust and shared experiences, and then from there, from that intimacy of hearts, a physical intimacy can develop as well. I think that that's fantastic. And if that's you, then enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice. I mean, just if that's the way you're feeling, I'd say go for it and embrace it. So good luck, Callie. I hope that works out for you. But I also want to ask another question, just to sort of switch gears. I think that another one of the key aspects about Beautiful, and something that I really care about as well, is the idea of the way media affects not only the language that we use to talk about each other as women, but the way young women identify themselves and develop. I think it's something that the book has a lot to say about, and I'd love for you to have some time to speak about it here. So can you please expand on the idea of how media influences the way young women develop their identities?
That is a great question. So we live in a world, unfortunately, that views women's bodies as oftentimes sexual objects. And so that means that in advertising and on TV and on the internet and on social media for sure, we see this hypersexualized female form which demonstrates to me, and also I think also to many other girls, that the strongest asset that we have is our body and our sexuality, and we should flaunt it, and we should almost in a way sell it in order to get whatever it is that we want. And that is not the message that I try to teach the young people with whom I work, because we are so much more than just our bodies, and we are so much more than just our sex appeal. Mm-hmm. And what I've seen happen with many of my students is that those messages, first of all, have a really strong impact on the way that they portray themselves, so the way that they dress, the way that they act, the way that they engage with members of the opposite sex or members of the same sex, and then end up like trying on a persona that isn't really them. And also I would say for many young people, boys too, a persona that's not comfortable for them either. I definitely was not ready at age 14 to be sexual in a way that I was flaunting my sexuality. I was just figuring out a little bit, understanding like that I had boobs and that my body was changing, and I was not ready to be showing that off. But that was what I was being encouraged to do by the culture around me. Not by my parents or by my close friends, but the larger culture. And that was a long time ago. Yeah, the macro culture. And that was a long time ago. And today, those images are much, much, much more sexualized. They are much more pervasive. The presence of social media in the lives of young people means that not only am I consuming images that are objectified and sexualized, but I also am feeling pressure to produce images where I am objectified and sexualized. And that's painful. And it also, I think, creates a really big conflict for many girls and also for boys, because girls often feel like I have to act this way or dress this way in order to be accepted, popular, or cool. And boys think that they have to expect this kind of behavior from girls in order for the boys to fit the stereotype of what a boy is expected to be like. And that's not healthy for anybody. And the fact that so much of this is happening on social media means not only is it deeply affecting young people's lives, but they have no break from it. Mm-hmm. When I was in high school, I would go home at the end of the day, and I would be with my parents and my sister, and it was a different environment. Mm-hmm. But now, when kids have their phones on them all the time until they go to sleep at night and fall asleep with the phone like on their face, yeah, there's no rest. And that creates immense stress, because also the vast majority of young people, girls and boys, don't look like those images that they're trying to create. Mm-hmm. And so they're just living in this constant cycle of objectification, judgment, dissatisfaction, decreased self-confidence, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Wow. One of my next questions for you is going to be about social media, so that answer is kind of a twofer. So thank you so much for that. kind of going along with
Sure.
that sort of like macro perspective on the way media and culture sort of doesn't really give young women a break at all. How do you think some of those identities that we as young women and presumably younger women are forced to sort of take on of an over-sexualized identity, how does that affect, their relationships with things like substance abuse? I mean, have you in your experience found a relationship between those two, and would you mind going into it?
I think that there's one little bridge in between. And I think that before I make a connection between kind of objectification and substance abuse, we also have to look at, well, two things. First of all, that these unrealistic standards and this objectification and sexualization results in and also is a product of dissatisfaction with the self. Because none of us really look like those images. Even the models in the pictures themselves don't actually look like those images. Mm-hmm. And so that means that young people are always trying to be something that's basically impossible to be without means like Photoshop and tons of makeup, et cetera, and sometimes surgery. So that leaves young people feeling dissatisfied and insecure, number one. And number two, that has a huge impact on their self-esteem. And then that's where we run into risk of substance abuse. That for many young people, especially because of the great access that young people have to various substances, they don't necessarily have the filters that we as adults have in terms of moderation, in terms of the way that we engage with different things. And so kids who are suffering from lack of self-confidence or lack of self-esteem might turn to substances in order to feel more comfortable in a social environment or to feel better about themselves, or to take less responsibility for their behavior. So I think that there's a really strong connection on one aspect of it. And another aspect of it, which cannot be ignored, is the role that substances, and particularly alcohol, play in sexual behavior, especially among young people in their late teens, early 20s. That in an environment where particularly drinking can be really prevalent and excessive drinking to a really dangerous point, then people lose their inhibitions and would engage in behaviors that they probably otherwise wouldn't. And that's where we see cases of, first of all, people engaging in sexual encounters that they may regret the next day, but also sexual encounters where there's not necessarily mutual consent.
Exactly.
And that's something that we really need to pay attention to.
Especially in the wake of some of the news that's been going around recently about that young woman from Stanford. So, yeah, that's a great point to make. I think that's really, really important to keep in mind for not just really young teenagers who are starting to enter this realm, but some of the people that are just right there in the middle of it. So yeah, that's a really, really
absolutely. I think that for that part of the population, basically college students, the responsibility for our behavior doesn't go away because someone has a drink. And for Brock Turner or for anyone to say that we need to take responsibility for the excessive drinking culture in colleges in general, that's not really recognizing that when we do something, each one of us, we're responsible. And so if that means that we're responsible for the amount that we drink, for the way that we behave, and for the way that we encounter another person, we can't ignore that responsibility.
Exactly. I think that in terms of that specific situation, addressing drinking is only one half. If anything, it's like a quarter of the conversation that needs to be had. So, yeah, I mean, preach, essentially, is my response to that. But we're getting kind of close to the end of the chat, and I have a couple questions I feel rather obligated to ask you. So to shift gears, the book is called Beautiful. It's all about beauty. So I think that a very straightforward question I really wanted to ask you, and just I think it would be really sweet to know what your response is just how do you define beautiful?
I'm not sure that beautiful is something that can be defined, because I think that it's different for each person. And I don't think that it's, beautiful is an adjective. I can say like, oh, that's a beautiful shirt. Oh, that's a beautiful woman. Oh, that's a beautiful man. But really beautiful is the way that I feel when I see something that evokes that sense of beauty. So when I go to the beach and the sun is setting and the sky is turning colors, that's beautiful because I feel a certain way when I see that. And the same is true when I look in the mirror and I feel great about what I see. That's beautiful. And so it's much more than just looking at something and saying, what is beauty? Because that runs the risk of turning it into a commodity. And that's what's happening in the media today. And beautiful is much more than just a commodified sense of how something should look.
That's a great answer, and I completely agree. I mean, it's not a descriptor, it's a feeling, I think, to get to the crux of the issue. So, yeah, thank you so much for that. And our last question, I think, is, I just wanted to ask, what's Beautiful Project up to? And do you have any big upcoming events that we can look forward to? I mean, I'm dying to learn more, so what's up? What's up with that?
Sure. The next big event is on July 9th and 10th in Berkeley. I'm co-facilitating a retreat called Real Talk About Sex for high school girls. Okay. And that'll be the first of a number of retreats on that particular subject, really in response to the issue that we talked about earlier about objectification and sexualization and how can I live in my body in a comfortable way. I'm also starting a virtual circles project where young women will participate in circles with me online where we talk about concepts of beauty and the way that we see ourselves, the way we see other people, the way we embody what it means to be a woman.
Wow.
I'm also working on a curriculum initiative with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, talking about how we see ourselves and how we can learn more about ourselves and understand how we engage with our emotional intelligence really as young women. And also working on another book, but that'll take a while.
Oh, I hope that when the book's out, you come back and you talk to us again about it. We'd love to have another conversation with you, I'm sure. But yeah.
Happily.
So yeah, thank you so much, Naomi. That concludes our BookTrib live chat. A Merrill Moss Media production. Please come back again, Naomi. This is a great conversation. And everyone, please be sure to check out Beautiful, Being an Empowered Young Woman and Beautiful Project. So yeah, thank you so much, and have a great afternoon, everybody.
Take care.